All right. Hello again, adventures, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is daily vlog number 23. So today, yesterday was RPG story time. Today, I want to continue talking about kind of game design stuff as it relates to I'm put my phone away. As it relates to tabletop RPGs. What I want to talk about today, I kind of mentioned it yesterday, and then I got sidetracked by telling stories about a Dragonborn Paladin fucking a mechanical trap to death. So, and this video is totally getting demonetized. Fun fact, none of my videos are monetized because I don't actually have enough anything on this channel to be considered a partner. But if it wasn't, because I said a naughty word really soon, then it would be. So, today, I want to talk about what I call kind of GM tools and why it has become more and more important to me as a GM to have kind of a plethora of different tools available to you. So let's first just start off by kind of defining what do I mean by GM tools. And I technically use that term pretty broadly because I'll do things like technically I'll call what was it? The reputation system in the Strixhaven book is technically a tool for GMs that you can use in a lot of different situations. But in this particular instance, when I'm referring to GM tools, I'm specifically referring to things that when your players try to do something that there isn't a strict rule for, like they have an ability and they want to use it in an interesting way and a different way, that's when you bring out your GM tools. And for a good tabletop RPG, GM tools like this are essential. The reason why is I've mentioned many times before that I'm not a fan of D&D the third edition or Pathfinder because it's D&D third edition. And the reason why is because there are so many rules and it is so overly designed, it takes away a lot of player and GM agency. If you want to do something cool with your character, there's probably a rule for it. And that rule is going to be so specific that in order to do your cool thing, you are going to have to build your character in a very, very specific way. And it's going to stop you from doing other cool things because each cool thing in the game has not only a set of rules about how to do it, but the rules are so incredibly specific that they will require particular feats. They will require particular stats for your attributes and stuff like that. Sometimes they require specific classes in order to do. So, and again, in order to get it so you can do this one cool thing, it's going to stop you from doing a lot of other cool things because they also have very specific things. And a lot of these things start becoming mutually exclusive. Like, well, you need to have an 18 in your dexterity score for this particular thing. And you need to take these feats. And that's why you need the 18, because you have to take these feats and they require an 18 in dex eventually. But I also want to try and do this thing, like dual wielding and something like cleave. It's not a combination that really would work because cleave is really more meant towards two-handed weapons, while dual wielding is not. But if you wanted to have a character that when they took somebody down with dual wielding, they could immediately go and attack another character, you can't really do that because in order to get the cleave and then the improved cleave ability, you are required to have, I believe, like power attack, if I remember correctly, requires either a 12 or a 13 strength. And then in order to get cleave in that, I think it has to go up to a 15 strength. In order to be able to dual wield at all, bare minimum, you have to have two weapon fighting and improved two weapon fighting. Thank you, computer. You need Two weapon fighting and improved two weapon fighting, which requires a 15 in dexterity. And to be really kind of to be hitting on a regular basis, you also need to take ambidexterity, which I can't remember if there's a dexterity requirement for that. So that in and of itself, that already requires you to have a minimum of 15 dex and a minimum of 15 strength, meaning the rest of your skills are going to be relatively low. And if you're something like a ranger, you're going to also need a wisdom score for your spells. So it's not a build that I'm familiar with anyone ever taking because it just doesn't work. And I think both of those are cool abilities, and I don't think they should be mutually exclusive, but because of really, really specific things, it does make them mutually exclusive. Now, there are other problems with dual wielding in the third edition. It was never particularly viable at high levels because of damage resistance and other things like that, is what I have been told. I have seen people make high-level dual wielding builds, so I don't know if that is just kind of the min-maxers talking, or if it really was something that just wasn't viable. I never played the tabletop version of third edition. I played a bunch of video game versions of it, which are very different, but still kind of based on the same thing. So anyway, so for a tabletop RPG, I think to really excel and allow people to play in a lot of different ways, there needs to be kind of a lack of rules in certain spots, and there needs to be a way for the DM to kind of arbitrate on certain things. And the more rules you add, the less the GM can arbitrate, because either they have to ignore rules in order to let somebody do something cool, which I totally understand the rule of cool. I think a lot of people misunderstand the rule of cool as in, well, if I want to do this, then I should be able to do it. And there's nothing that, it doesn't matter if there's already a rule for it. I want to do it this way, and that's the rule of cool. It's not. It's generally, don't let the rules get in the way of, don't let the rules get in the way of having fun. However, part of having fun is understanding that if you completely ignore the rules, you're actually going to be handicapping other players. Like a really good example is, I think it's the Battlemaster Fighter in 5th edition, has an ability that they get that allows them to basically study an enemy and learn a bunch of stuff about them. If you allow any character or any player to just roll like a knowledge check, like a nature check or an arcana check, depending on the or a history check, depending on what kind of creature it is, to get that same information, maybe you're going rule of cool because they're like, well, maybe I read about this and then okay, so I guess you can learn about this. But that's also belittling and devaluing that ability of the Battlemaster fighter. So while yes, one person is having fun with it, the other person isn't, because now their character is less useful. So rule of cool needs to be interpreted in a way that everybody gets to have fun, not one person gets to exploit the rule of cool to make sure that they're having fun at the expense of other people. So anyway, so in order to really encourage and allow your players to be as creative as they possibly can, having a robust amount of GM tools to kind of reward or punish certain kinds of ideas is really essential. So what do I mean by this? Well, in 5th edition D&D, one of the things that I liked about it when I first started playing it was I really enjoyed the advantage-disadvantage system, because it simplified everything. Is that a cool idea? I'm going to give you a disadvantage on it. Oh, is that a cool idea, but it sounds like it'd be really hard? I'm going to give you a disadvantage. And that was all there ever was. And it simplified it even more to, you couldn't have like multiple stacks of advantage or disadvantage. you simply had just advantage or disadvantage, or if you had one of both or multiple of both, they canceled out as a flat roll. And on one aspect, it made GMing for 5th edition significantly easier. And it's one of the reasons why 5th edition is as popular as it is right now, because it's very easy. Compared to a lot of other systems, 5th edition is remarkably easy to Game Master for. But it also means that any unique idea that a player has is going to feel a little bit less unique, because whether it's like the coolest idea ever or it's kind of cool, they get the exact same reward. Oh, advantage. Can we use... And it's the exact same reward that they can get a dozen other ways. Getting advantage in 5e is remarkably simple. Especially if you do something like if you use the optional flanking rules. All you have to do is get on the opposite side of an enemy as an ally, which is not difficult to do when you're using a battle map, and you automatically get advantage. So as much as, yes, I think the advantage system was really great, and I think it really, really helped 5th edition, now that I've played a lot more RPGs and I've done a lot more kind of homebrewing and creating my own stuff, I've started to realize what a limitation it is that the only tools you have in 5e for rewarding your players are advantage or disadvantage, and then DM inspiration, which was horribly named because there's also bardic inspiration. It should have been called something significantly different, like maybe a dragon point or something like that. Just anything that differentiates it. It's a dumb idea to use the same term to refer to two very, very different things. So that was on the designers for just being stupid, because they didn't used to call it DM inspiration. It was just, you can get inspiration, and then there was also bardic inspiration, and it was just dumb. So anyway, those are the only two things you can do. And inspiration, not only does it not stack, so you can only ever give out one, but it goes away after a long rest. So it's not even a resource that, at the end of a session, if somebody does something cool, you can't give them DM inspiration and it be worth anything. And again, the only thing that DM inspiration does is it lets them have advantage. So DM inspiration is just another version of advantage. So 5th edition does have this bit of a problem with the GM has an extremely limited amount of tools to reward good role-playing and good kind of problem solving. Now, if we go over to something like the Essence 20 system, you have a bunch of different ways to reward good role-playing, and they all kind of can work together. You have the advantage-disadvantage system, which they call edge and snag. So if you have an edge on something, you roll the d20 twice, take the higher of the two rolls. You have a snag, you roll the d20 twice, take the lower of the two rolls. That's super simple. That's taken directly from D&D 5th edition. Again, the Essence 20 system was originally going to be a Power Rangers conversion of D&D 5th edition, and then they decided to go in their own way, which was really good, and I love it. But in addition to that, you have the upshift and downshift system, which is basically you can increase or decrease the dice size of the skill dice that they're rolling based on what they're calling. And you can have multiple upshifts and downshifts, and they can interact with each other. So if you have two upshifts and one downshift, they interact together to turn that into just a single upshift. Same way if you have three downshifts and one upshift, well, that turns it into two downshifts. So now you have a significantly more useful thing that doesn't require a ton of additional math or anything like that. That's one of the other reasons that I'm not a huge fan of 3rd edition, is because of their use of what are called floating modifiers. If you've never heard that term, a floating modifier is a modifier. It's just a number that you add or subtract to your roll that is floating, that kind of changes. It's not technically attached to anything concrete. And in practice, what it is depending on what's happening in the scene, you will have multiple floating modifiers because, again, 3rd edition has a rule for everything. And a lot of the rules, their result is add this floating modifier. And there wasn't kind of a category or anything. It wasn't like, we'll add a defense bonus or that so that you didn't have to worry. All floating modifiers, with I think a few exceptions, stacked. So on a single attack roll, you could have 3 or 4 different floating modifiers. And even if you were making multiple turns, attacks in the same turn, they might have 2 different floating modifiers because nothing was technically ever this is the same. And the floating modifiers could change randomly based on which part of the rules that you were using, depending on who was arguing against it and which obscure source book they were deciding that they were going to use that rule from. It was a bit of a nightmare, and it turned the math for 3rd edition into a really complicated mess because it wasn't just roll a d20 and add a single number. It was roll a d20, okay, now you're going to add your attack modifier, which your attack modifier in and of itself was your basic attack bonus plus the bonus from whatever weapon you're using, minus any penalties that you already have, like if you're dual wielding or making multiple attacks or anything like that. All of those things could possibly cause a modifier. So those are technically not floating. Those are always this is the same. But then you start dealing with something like dual wielding. Attacking with your offhand would, unless you had ambidexterity, have a different modifier than attacking with your on-hand. So not technically a floating modifier, but it is a different attack roll. Now we have to look at, okay, well, how many people are around you? Are you flanked? Are you prone? Are they provoking an attack of opportunity? Do they have some sort of resistance or some sort of bonus against attack of opportunities? Okay. If it's a ranged attack, are they engaged in melee? Because then you're firing into melee, and that's different. Is someone in between you and the other person? There were so many different things that would change how the attack worked. And then you would have specific attacks that would change it, like, well, I want to do a power attack. Well, a power attack means you take some of your attack, or you subtract something from your attack roll, and then you get to do a little bit more into the damage, and it was a remarkably complex thing. I'm not a fan of floating modifiers being the only tool in your toolbox, because yes, you can use a lot of floating modifiers and that can give you a lot of control, but what eventually happens is D&D 3.5. A single turn can take upwards of 30 minutes as they have to go through all the different stuff that they have to deal with, and that's not fun. And then you need a degree in calculus in order to figure out your attack roll. So none of that is fun, in my opinion, and I believe it bogs down games. It's one of the reasons why there was a bit of an exodus when 3rd edition started, and then 4th edition had an even bigger exodus. The reason that quote unquote D&D got less popular during 4th edition was a direct cause of 3rd edition. 3rd edition was the first time that people didn't technically upgrade to the next edition because it was so drastically different than 2nd edition that people didn't want to have to take the time to learn it. The same thing happened with 4th edition, though fun fact, it took less than a year for 4th edition to outsell every single book that 3rd edition had sold in its entire lifetime. So the idea that 4th edition was unpopular has always been a myth. Right. So I'm not a fan of floating modifiers, and that's one of the things that 5th edition did very, very well, is they got rid of all floating modifiers. We don't have floating modifiers anymore. That is a good thing, aside from sharpshooter and great weapon fighter. Those are the only 2 times you have a floating modifier, and it's a very simple one. It's -5, and it never changes. So as far as floating modifiers go, for me, that's not horrible. We look at Essence to 20, and they aren't floating modifiers. They're changing what you're rolling, but that's not math. They literally have a little... they have a table that you can actually, when I ran my Power Rangers game, I actually had it in Roll20. I just had a picture of it in there so people could do it. And you can literally just sit there and go, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be rolling. What do I have? I've got 3 upshifts, 1, 2, 3, and you count up. I've got 2 downshifts, 1, 2. That's what I roll. It's remarkably simple. It's really, really easy, and it doesn't require a massive amount of math. It doesn't require a long conversation about, well, does this bonus count? Does this bonus count? No, it's upshift, downshift. In addition to the up and downshift system in Essence 20 and the snag edge system in Essence 20, you also have the story point system, where if they do something really cool, you can reward them with a story point that they can use for a bunch of different things. And there's been a few different systems that I've looked at that have a kind of story point style system. Fabula Ultima has their Fabula points. Again, Essence 20 has story points. Open Legend kind of has something similar, but it not really with their Legend points. Legend points just gives you advantage, but it works differently in Open Legend. Yeah, so having those 3 separate ways to reward good role-playing means that you can have 3 people have 3 different ideas about what to do, and each one can try their idea during the game, and each one is going to have a unique reward for doing that. One of them, you go, okay, well, I'm going to give you an edge on that because that seems like a good idea. Okay, cool. And the next one goes, okay, well, I think with what you're describing, you would have an easier time than most people doing that, so I'm going to give you an upshift 1 on that. And then the third person, that was a really creative idea. I'm going to give you a story point for that. So many different ways to reward the players. And again, the idea that you don't know what you're going to get when you decide to do something is really, really essential for players to feel encouraged to think creatively and to come up with unique solutions. If the only solution they have is, do I get advantage? Then a lot of times they're only going to think it creatively enough to get the one reward that they know that they can get. And then anything outside of that, they're going to go, oh, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I really, really enjoy that. The Cypher system has a kind of interesting system to reward players where there's a couple different ways that you can make things easier or harder for the players. You can do what's called easing the check, which is basically you just lower the difficulty by 3 points, or 1 level is equal to the 3 points. So you can ease it. You can give the player an asset, which technically does the same thing. It lowers the difficulty by 1 level, or the 3 points. But there's a limitation to assets. You can only use 2 assets on any given roll. So an ease is just a universal, it's going to become easier. Giving them an asset is going to actually technically limit them, because there's other things that they might use as an asset, including the other players. If another player decides to help out someone with a roll, then that counts as the player having an asset. And again, they can only have a maximum of 2 assets. Something that I do in my games in particular, because I stream them and we like audience interaction, is the audience can actually use channel points to give them a bunch of tokens that I created, which are basically just free edge tokens. And edge in the Cypher system is basically just another way that you can lower the difficulty or increase your damage. It has a couple different functions, but it requires you to burn points from one of your pools to do it. So the audience can give them free edge tokens so that they can just add edge without having to pay any penalty for that. They give them reroll tokens. I'm a big fan of giving out something that allows the players to reroll as a reward. And reroll tokens tends to be kind of the universal thing because the players can kind of bank them and use them. I have no problem with players using multiple tokens on a single roll where they just keep re-rolling until they get the result that they want, because they're limited enough that if they're wasting all their reroll tokens on this one roll, they're not going to have them available at another one. If you're just giving them out willy-nilly, then yeah, maybe put some limitations on, well, you can only reroll once or twice or something like that, just so it doesn't bog down the game. Then they also have what are called player intrusion tokens. In the Cypher system, one of the other things that you can do to reward players is you actually give out experience. And there's a ton of different ways to use experience. You can burn an experience point to have a player intrusion, which is basically just, I get to be the GM for a single sentence, and I describe how something is going to be beneficial to my character. You can use intrusion tokens to cancel out a GM intrusion. One of the things that GMs are supposed to do a lot in the Cypher system, and I don't do quite as much as I probably should, is they're supposed to be doing these GM intrusions pretty regularly, like at least once per character per session. And basically it's just, okay, well, I'm going to add this hiccup to this. I'm going to make this slightly more difficult because of this story reason. And when they do that, they give an experience point out to the player, and then they also give an experience point, and then that player gets to give another experience point to someone else. So it's a really cool system. And then they can also use experience points to give them a short-term benefit. They can basically burn an experience point to just give them something useful, like, oh, I have a set of lockpicks on me. I'm going to burn an XP point to give me a set of little lockpicks. Okay? Or they can spend 2 experience points to give themselves a long-term benefit. Well, I actually remember reading about this particular creature, and I know its anatomy really well. So for as long as we're fighting this very, very specific creature in this very specific area, I want to have some kind of bonus when dealing with them. That would be considered a long-term benefit. So the Cypher system has a single reward system that can be used in a number of ways. And then the other thing you can use experience points for is leveling up, which they call advancement. So you have the XP system where you just give an XP for good role playing, or you give it as part of the GM intrusion. Then you also have the ease and hinder system where easing is lower it, hindering it is hiring it. And then you also have assets that you can grant and things like that. So again, the Cypher system has a lot of different things, and because we don't use XP, because I basically use milestone leveling for my Zelda game that uses the Cypher system, I just came up with a bunch of different tokens that allow them to do the same thing, where I can use this for a short-term benefit or a long-term benefit. They have player intrusion tokens and stuff like that. So so when I'm looking at an RPG and trying to decide if I like it, one of the things I'm looking at is, well, what systems are in place that give me as a GM the ability to modify a check based on the unique thing that the player is doing. Because the more tools that I have to be able to do that, the more common it's going to be for the players to use them, and the more common it's going to be for the players to do more unique things. If I can't reward the players, then in general they're just going to stick to the rules. Which again, if that's the way that you like to play, you probably play Pathfinder. No. If that's the way that you like to play, that's perfectly fine. I think at that point, you're kind of missing the point of tabletop RPGs. If you're only doing what the rules tell you you're allowed to do, you're effectively playing a video game at that point, because that's how video games have to run. It's one of the reasons why I personally consider both Pathfinder and D&D 3rd edition 3.5 to be video games more than I consider them to be tabletop role-playing games, because they have the video game mindset of the writers and designers have to anticipate every single thing that you do and make a rule for it in order for you to be able to do it. It's a very, I would describe it as a permissive system where you are only allowed to do what is permitted specifically in the rules. And if there isn't a rule for it, you can't do it. Which, again, I understand that not everybody plays 3rd edition or Pathfinder that way, but that's the way it was designed. So, yeah, like I said, it's a subject, like I remember talking to a buddy of mine and mentioning floating modifiers. He goes, what's a floating modifier? So floating modifiers are just numbers that change based on what you're doing in that moment. That makes that particular role completely unique. And they call them floating because they're not technically attached to anything concrete. They're just kind of floating in the ether. And he's like, oh, that's a really good term for that. I'm like, yeah, I have no idea where I heard it. I just know that it's a really common term in kind of discussion of tabletop RPGs. I've seen a lot of people use the term floating modifier, and so I use it. Yeah, I hope you guys find this stuff interesting. Like I said, I'm really delving deep into tabletop RPG design right now. And so, I don't know, it's been fun to talk about it. And apparently you guys have been enjoying at least some of these videos, because watch time is up on them. So, let me know if this is something that you guys actually do enjoy. And if you guys have things that you enjoy, either as a player or as a GM, in a tabletop RPG, specifically from a design perspective, let me know. Or if there's a particular system that you feel does this really, really well, let me know. I want to know about that sort of stuff, because then I get to look at a new RPG, and I love doing that. So anyway, it's gonna be all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right, bye bye.